estou aqui com o Norman Ohler. Is that the right one? Yeah, okay. Norman Ohler. O Norman escreveu um livro o Norman é alemão. Ele escreveu um livro sobre... É um livro completamente diferente eu quis falar com ele porque tudo que a gente tem de literatura, de documentação, principalmente da Segunda Guerra e dessas figuras icônicas como Hitler, Mussolini, é muito baseado em estratégia de guerra, é muito baseado em refazer a história do que aconteceu no conflito. E esse livro tem uma perspectiva muito diferente do conflito, que ele é baseado em como a droga foi desenvolvida e atuou na guerra de maneira decisiva, como ela influenciou o rumo do mais sangrento conflito que a gente já teve até hoje na história da humanidade. Thanks for receiving us, Norman. I was introducing you and telling that 99.9% of the documents we have on war are based on strategy, are based on trying to put in a historical context, and you have such a different piece of investigative journalism here that it's based on how the drugs influenced and affected the most deadly conflict we ever had. And first of all, people are very sensitive today on social media, on everything. If you say a word like Hitler, it's like you're saying a really bad word. It's almost forbidden to say. And you have a book titled High Hitler. Did you consider that when you're producing the book, all these sensitive questions, even though you're German?
Yeah. Well, also in Germany, Hitler is a very guarded subject. So there's the historians, they in a way own what we know of Hitler. But when I did research and I was looking at all these documents in several archives in Germany and America that historians never really examined, I realized that there's a story here that should be told, and it was very interesting for me also to do the research and to fit the pieces together.
And the story, the story was so good that it would you take a risk and write about it, even though people would probably consider that, oh, he's writing about Hitler, he's German and he's writing about Hitler and something like that. And in the beginning of the book, there's an interesting perspective. You talk about these huge potencies on Europe. They have their colonies, such as France and Great Britain. They have their colonies where they took their vanilla, sugar, coffee, tea, and Germany didn't have colonies, so they have to produce their own material to satisfy people. And I suppose that's why you put that German became such a high potency on producing drugs. Is that right?
Yes, well, when I worked on the book, I worked with a very influential German historian, Hans Mommsen, and he said I should examine why drugs play such an important part in the German culture and society. So I researched how it all started in the 19th century, how many of the illegal drugs we know today, for example heroin, was once a German product. It was a legal product with advertisements for it, and
for newborn babies, they would prescribe heroin for newborn babies.
Well, it was to make them fall asleep better.
Yes.
If you have a baby, sometimes it's very frustrating in the evening. They just don't fall asleep. So in the late 19th century in Germany, they thought heroin is a good answer, but obviously heroin makes you addicted.
Yeah.
So they realized this a little bit later on. This is quite interesting. a lot of drugs, when they first appear, we don't realize that maybe they're dangerous and addictive drugs. It was the same with methamphetamine, who became a very popular drug in Nazi Germany, and it was completely legal, and Germans were taking it to stay alert, to stay awake, to be happy. And then the army started getting interested in it because they realized if you take methamphetamine, you need to sleep less. You can stay awake for 3 days and 3 nights maybe. So I examined this whole history of how drugs became important in Germany, and then how the Nazis used them to their advantage.
And reading your book, I'm quite convinced that the World War II was never been so bloody, so violent, if it were not because of drugs. Are you convinced of that?
Well, absolutely. We also have to see, though, that in most wars, even before World War II, drugs were being used, but different drugs. For example, alcohol was always important. Even tobacco was used to give soldiers to calm them, or alcohol was used to give them more courage. But the Nazis were the first government to use a very potent synthetic drug, like methamphetamine is the strongest drug we know. And they gave them in millions of dosages to their soldiers. For example, before Germany attacked France, 35 million dosages of methamphetamine were given out, and that resulted in the German tank troops being extremely fast and not stopping at night, and the Western Allies were completely surprised. So it had a big influence on the so-called Blitzkrieg, which is the speed war. The speed war is not really possible without methamphetamine.
I see. In this point, I think we have to split the drug issue in two. You have the drugs used by the troops, which are the methamphetamine, the drugs to keep them awake, to blitzkrieg, to keep them awake for days, to
also make them more aggressive.
More aggressive, and they feel more powerful, fearless, and stuff like that. And you have the drugs used by the intelligentsia, the people more. You even talk about how some decisions were made by Hitler, influenced by drugs. How he convinced Mussolini to not leave his side on war, totally influenced by drugs. Would you talk about this? And it's weird because the fundamental principle of Hitler, of the Nazis, were not put something poisonous in their bodies, but once they started, they never stopped. Would you talk about this perspective of drugs?
Yeah, well, it's the big irony of the story, I guess, that the Nazis, when they started in Germany in 1933, they showed themselves as a clean-cut movement against all poisons, and one of the main points of the ideology, of the racist ideology, was to create the purity of the German blood and remove all the toxins from Germany, which included drugs, but it also included Jews and other minorities. So using drugs is completely against Nazi ideology, but on the other hand, when they realized that they could have advantages from using it, then they used it. So it shows you a face of hypocrisy of the system. And this is especially true when it comes to Hitler himself, because a very important part of the cult that was built around him was to show him as this totally abstinent person.
Yeah.
No alcohol, no
vegetarian.
Coffee, vegetarian, a completely pure human being that would only work for his people. But in fact, he met a certain person in 1936 called Theo Morel, who became his personal physician.
Theo Morel, his private doctor.
Yeah, he became his private doctor, and Theo Morel convinced Hitler to receive daily injections, and beginning, these injections were vitamins, and but this changed in 1941 when Hitler received an opiate for the first time, and in 1943 he received Eukodal for the first time, which is stronger than heroin. And he took Eukodal especially quite often until the end of the war, so it's the absolute opposite of what was shown to the German public or to the public in the world.
And quoting you, from 1941 to 1944, there was not a single day that Hitler was not high. He took drugs, and I assume that after his assassination plot on what we call the Valkyria, that
July 20,
yeah,
1944.
He started using cocaine like for his ears and to relieve the pain. Was he a junkie at the end of the war? Because you put an image on him that he was drilling and his teeth was falling.
Well, it was clear that his health deteriorated rapidly in 1944, and especially after the bomb attack he was quite heavily injured actually. His eardrums were perforated and he had hundreds of splinters in his body, and Morell immediately came and gave him a very strong injection of narcotics, of painkillers. And then another doctor comes in and he gives Hitler cocaine against his pain in the ears, and the other doctor wrote a report about this later for the American intelligence after the war, describing how he was very surprised how much Hitler immediately loved the cocaine, and whenever he came into the room to examine Hitler's ears, Hitler just said, "You don't need to examine me, just give me cocaine. I have very important meetings with my generals, and I need to have my head clear." So he basically loved every drug he could get except alcohol. He never really got into alcohol, but other drugs where he believed that they would help him to stay alert and stay functional, he would always use those, because he was afraid that he would miss decisions, that he would, for example, be ill or not be capable of meeting his generals and convincing them to keep the war as he wanted it to go on. So he became very much dependent on these substances, cocaine and especially the opiate, Eukodal, which he took every other day, 20 milligrams intravenously, which is a very high dosage, in the fall of 1941. So late in the war he certainly became what we call a junkie. And in 1945, when he didn't receive these drugs anymore, he suffered from heavy withdrawal symptoms and started shaking, and really felt terrible because of it.
That's that image we had of Hitler on his final days, shaking and drilling, and he didn't have like the other aspect of drugs, that is the megalomania that drove him to a lot of, I think, bad decisions on war strategy. So you think he lost war so fast in these final days because of the drugs, because of these decisions based on his addiction?
Well, Germany lost the war because it was an impossible war to begin with, because Germany was not strong enough to fight the Soviet Union and the West at the same time. So this decision, basically Hitler's decision, led to Germany's defeat. But within that hopeless situation, Hitler also made decisions that were very irrational and did not help the Germans at all, and made it even worse for Germany. And some of these decisions you can clearly see, because you can see in Morell's notes and the doctor's notes at what time, what day he gives him a strong opiate, and then an hour later Hitler has meetings and makes decisions. So that's what I mean by he was not sober when he took these decisions, which would have requested him to be really sober and really rational and very, very responsible. But he kept himself in this delusional state of, what you say, megalomania.
Yeah.
And in the end he was the only one in that state. because all around him people were saying we're losing, we have to make rational decisions now, we have to retreat our troops, and Hitler kept himself in this artificial high where he showed to the other people that he was completely convinced that Germany would still win, and this has a lot to do with drugs.
Okay, and right about at least one OD, one overdose he had, I think it's a cocaine overdose. Yeah. Was there any other stories that you couldn't confirm that you didn't put on the book, such as?
Well, when you write a historical nonfiction book, you have to be very careful about your sources.
That's why I'm asking you.
You have to, and if you only have one source, you have to look if you can find other sources, and so I only put things in the book where I could be sure to link it to a source, to documents or to reports, which are then mentioned in the back of the book. So the book actually has a very extensive apparatus where the readers can see where the information comes from. And there, for example, there has been lots of rumors that Hitler also took methamphetamine, but I didn't find any documents, so I didn't write about this. So I was trying to be as careful as I could to show what was going on.
Okay, that's what makes so reliable the book. And one last question. You said after Hitler's suicide, at least 100,000 people in Germany, they committed suicide as well. Mm-hmm. Was the whole Germany on drugs? Because that's the picture we have when you think about it. After his leader died, so many people committed suicide. You think there's you can say that?
Well, you can say that pervitin, that was the name of methamphetamine, was extremely successful product in Germany. Germans took more methamphetamine than they drank coffee because it was cheaper than coffee, and coffee actually was not so easy to get when the war started. But the company who made methamphetamine, they produced it all the way to the end. They even received the raw materials they needed in February 1945 to make millions and millions more tablets. Each tablet contained 3 milligrams of methamphetamine. So Germans had access to that drug that picks you up, and in the war, with all the stress and the sorrow and the depression and the hardships that go with war, people were using this methamphetamine a lot to keep going, basically. But I don't have any documents about these suicides linking them to methamphetamine. So I think also what we have to talk about is that we cannot explain the whole Nazi era through drugs alone. Obviously, a lot of people really believed in Hitler even without drugs. So when he committed suicide, they thought it's right also to follow him. But these were really the hardliners, the party members. Some mayors did it, policemen did it. So yeah, that's how it would.
Okay, there's a lot of circumstances combined to bring
I think to really understand this time, it's very helpful to understand the very important role that the drugs played. Yeah. But I'm not only talking about drugs in the book. I'm trying to give an overall history of the Third Reich from that angle of how drugs played a role, but many things also happened without the usage of drugs.
Yeah, but it's so hard to find someone with the guts to write about something so delicate on this topic, that I have to congratulate you to bring this book to public, and for your time for the interview. Thank you very much.
Obrigado.
Obrigado.